Thank you for joining us on Heritage Events Live. We're delighted to welcome you to Crisis in Nicaragua, Insights on Ortega and Murillo, Repression Ahead of Elections. Please welcome our host, James Roberts, Research Fellow for Economic Freedom and Growth at the Heritage Foundation. We hope you enjoy the program.
Thanks very much, Maven. Welcome. We hope that this presentation will be viewed, if not now, then in streaming, because it's an important presentation to draw attention to a very critical and bad situation in Nicaragua, as Nicaragua gears up for another presidential election on November 7th. And I'm going to introduce our three guests who will explain the situation in better detail than I can, but then we will have some time for some questions. I'd also like to introduce briefly our newly hired expert on Latin America, Mateo Haidar, who joins us having recently graduated with honors from the University of Florida and is a fully bilingual American, but also a citizen of Colombia. So he's going to be excellent about heritage on Latin American issues. And so Mateo will be in the background, and we'll be calling on him from time to time. So let me just introduce our three guests. Carlos Fernando Chamorro is a Nicaraguan investigative journalist and the founder and editor of Confidencial, a weekly newspaper based in Managua. Chamorro is a graduate of McGill University in Canada and has many years of experience in journalism in Nicaragua. He is the son of former President Violeta Chamorro and the brother of presidential candidate Cristiana Chamorro, who has been unlawfully put under house arrest by the Ortega-Murillo dictatorship since June 2nd. So welcome, Carlos Fernando. We also have Berta Valle, who is a Nicaraguan broadcast journalist and human rights activist. Berta has many years of experience as a television anchor and has a master's degree from the INCAI Business School. Berta is the wife of pro-democracy activist, Yale global leader, and presidential candidate Felix Maradiaga. And Mr. Maradiaga has been unlawfully detained by the Ortega-Murillo regime since June 8th. Next, we have Victoria Cardenas. Vicky is a Nicaraguan businesswoman and human rights activist also. She also has a master's degree in business administration from the Universidad Americana. Vicky is the wife of Nicaraguan economist, executive director of the Nicaraguan think tank Unides, and presidential candidate Juan Sebastian Chamorro. Mr. Chamorro has been unlawfully detained by the Ortega-Murillo regime also since June 8th. And so Berta and Vicky were forced to flee Nicaragua as of this summer, and they are currently in exile and are campaigning to bring international attention to the regime's repression, including the unjust imprisonment of their husbands and more than 140 political prisoners. So thanks very much to you for joining us today. Carlos Fernando, could you start out by sort of laying out the picture of what the situation is right now in Nicaragua?
Thank you, Jim, and say hello to Vicky and Berta and all our audience to have this opportunity to share an update about the Nicaraguan crisis. I think we can describe what is going on in Nicaragua this day with the word fear, uncertainty, repression. We have been living under a police state, and I use this word literally, since the end of 2018. And a police state means suppression of freedom of reunion, of freedom of the press, of freedom of expression, of freedom of mobilization. There was no declaration of a state of emergency in Nicaragua. Everything has been de facto. And we lived through this process, and I guess some people thought it could not ever get worse. But in the beginning of this year, as we were getting close to the elections of November the 7th, the regime, the government decided to launch a new wave of repression, a total crackdown against the opposition. And that's what explains that I am in exile, like Berta and Vicky. I am a reporter. My newsroom was assaulted for a second time on May the 20th. It had been assaulted on December 2018, forcing me to go into exile for the first time. They imposed censorship on television, and I am broadcasting my show through YouTube and Facebook. So after the assault on my newsroom, it continued with detention with aspiring presidential candidates from the opposition, 7 of them, including Juan Sebastian, Felix, Cristiana Chamorro, Arturo Cruz, Medardo Mairena, the peasant leader, Miguel Mora, another journalist, and some others. But not only the presidential candidates, but they also capture political leaders, civic leaders, including businessmen, student leaders, journalists, human rights defenders, to sum up these 36 individuals that are now in the prison of El Chipote, while there are another 120 political prisoners in other prisoners. This all means that the expectation that there was never a real expectation of a free and fair election in Nicaragua, but I guess there was a conclusion of all of us as a society that we were going to try whether it will be possible to defy the regime, even though there were no real conditions for a competitive and fair election, no international observers, but there was this kind of last attempt to see if there was a possibility to go through the electoral process to find out a political solution to the long Nicaraguan crisis that has been there in the last 3 years, with more than 300 people assassinated. These crimes are all in impunity, 3 years of consecutive economic recession. Well, Ortega decided to shut down the electoral road. And on November the 7th, now we're not going to have elections anymore. We're going to have the ritual of a one-party candidate that will be Daniel Ortega and his wife, Rosario Murillo, with no political competition. They not only captured the political leaders, but also eliminated the juridical rights of the political parties. So on November the 7th, we will have the FSLN and 5 other collaborationist parties, which do not really represent the opposition or the electorate. They're just part of an electoral circus. That is the situation, and we have to add to this situation the COVID-19 epidemic crisis that has been denied by the government since last year. The Nicaraguan government claims that there have only 200 individuals have died because of the pandemic. That would be a world miracle. According to our research with experts in health, epidemiologists and others, there have been more than 10,000 deaths. And they said that only 1 individual is dying per week. We reported today that there are 20 people dying daily in a Managua hospital and 350 in a couple of weeks in the northern part of the country. So there is a humanitarian tragedy, and there is also another tragedy that means the migration or exiles. I said I came to exile in Costa Rica 2019. I came back at the end of that year to defy the regime. Now I left again, and this year there will be about probably 60,000 Nicaraguans fleeing to the US and more than 30,000 to Costa Rica. That will mean that we had 100,000 exiles, refugees in 2018 and 19, and this year we will have probably 90,000 additionally. So that is the situation. I think it's important for the world to focus the attention on the crisis of Nicaragua. The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights and the Office of Human Rights of the UN have done a formidable work by documenting the violation of human rights. But it is the moment for the world to go one step further, and they have to decide whether after the November the 7th farce, whether they will give recognition, legitimacy to the dictatorship of Daniel Ortega in January next year. I think that is a very important decision, and it depends on us, the Nicaraguans, how to liberate the political prisoners, how to restore our political freedom. But I think there is also the need for the isolation of the regime and the need for more political pressure from the international community.
Well, thank you so much, Fernando, for that excellent description of the current situation. Next, we're going to turn to Vicky Cardenas for her perspectives as the wife of presidential candidate who has been arrested and detained now for more than 3 months. Vicky, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for the invitation and thank you for the invitation and the time to hear us, our stories. Everything that Carlos Fernando said resonates, with us. And Berta and I are under this tragic journey of being the wives of 2 political prisoners right now. Today marks the 200th anniversary of the independence of Central America and Nicaragua, and we should be celebrating today. But there's no way that we can celebrate when more than 140 political prisoners are being tortured and are being illegally detained at this moment for more than 3 months, as you mentioned. Also, tomorrow marks 100 days of the illegal detention of Juan and Felix. They wanted to run for president to have a free, democratic Nicaragua. And that's why they are in prison. That's why they are detained. That's why the whole opposition of Nicaragua is detained for just wanting a democratic, free, and just country. In June 8, my life changed and the life of my family, and also for the rest of the last 36 persons that have been detained in the last 3 months. As Carlos Fernando mentioned, our husbands and the rest of the opposition, we were trying to have a change in this process of elections, but the regime decided to shut down the electoral process and detain the whole opposition. We are very worried about our families. I am talking today as a wife and a mother, and in behalf of the rest of the families of the more than 100 political prisoners. In the case of our husbands, they were disappeared for 84 days. We didn't have any clue where they were or how they were doing. They briefly reappeared them, but since then, now they are being held incommunicado. We know that they are being tortured in many different ways. For Juan Sebastian, for example, he has lost 25 pounds in less than 3 months, which is very preoccupying to me. The lights in his cell are on 24/7, and the interrogations are every day for more than an hour. and they were telling him that I was detained, that he was going to see me entering the prison where he's been held at. And as I said, they are being incomunicado. They don't have access to their lawyers or to the families. And we are very worried for their well-being, for how they're doing, for their health. So this is a call for urgent action, as Carlos Fernando said, to international community, because we cannot talk about an electoral process when we have more than 140 political prisoners, and they don't have a defense. They are on a judicial trial, which is illegally and totally manipulated. So what we want is for the international community to do whatever it takes to put pressure on the regime for the freedom and the respect of the human rights of the Nicaraguans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicky, for your courageous statement and the courage of your husband and all of the pro-democracy actors who have been detained and imprisoned in Nicaragua. Next, and finally, we're going to turn to Berta Valle, and she's going to give her perspectives, also the wife of the detained presidential candidates. Berta, please.
Thank you, James. Vicky and Carlos Fernando, it's great to see you too. I just want to start saying that me working on TV and knowing the power and the importance of the freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and feel very sad and worried about what's going on in Nicaragua, because even for us being here, telling our stories, it represents a clear and potential danger for our family, especially for our husbands that are detained. And as Vicky mentioned, tomorrow there will be 100 days that they have been detained illegally, and 84 days of those 100 they were disappeared. And thanks God that they are fine, in the sense that we know that they are alive. But clearly, what our family saw when they had the opportunity to have a 20-minute meeting is that their health it's been deteriorating. Especially, one of the things we saw is that they've been losing a lot of weight, and this is shown as a bad nutrition they're having. And last week, the family of political prisoners did a press conference, and we spoke about what our families are suffering. So one of the things is the loss between 12 and 36 pounds of some of the political prisoners. Also, we knew that they are not being able to receive sunlight, and that's why they seem extremely pale, paleness. Also, they have been, some of them have been put apart with no contact with the outer world for more than 2 months. Especially, we know the risk that the women are suffering inside the prisoners. Also, some of our families suffer from chronic disease before being detained, and we are very worried about these diseases and also the new ones that they can develop for this treatment. We heard that the lights in their cells remain 24 hours a day on, and this can tell us that they are not receiving a healthy and quality of sleep. And also, that is a very alarming, because we know their health can be deteriorating even more. So clearly, the regime of Daniel Ortega, it's making us, our family, being tortured. And just by being held in a room without any contact with your family, with your lawyers, with your your doctor, it's considered a torture. So we are asking for the international community to really help us in a country where there's no rule of law, where all citizens we are not safe. We as citizens don't have anywhere to go because the regime controls all the powers. They control the judicial power, the police, the army, everything. So there's no place to go. And ahead of the general election on November 7, the government of Nicaragua has orchestrated a brutal crackdown on journalists, civil society organizations, and political parties. And it seeks to impose a totalitarian one-party system where dissent is not allowed and critics are silenced. With the help of authoritarian regimes like Cuba, Venezuela, and Russia, and local elites, Ortega and his family amassed a huge fortune, which made him and his wife, now the Vice President of Nicaragua, seem invisible. So we urge the international community to act urgently to respond to Daniel Ortega's unprecedented attack on democracy and human rights to ensure that Nicaraguan people can one day live in dignity, peace, and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Berta. Well, that's a very sad but a very comprehensive review of what is going on in a country that is only a couple hours by air from Miami, very close to the United States, and with which the United States has obviously had a long history along with the other countries in Central America. And it is a situation that should be of great concern, not just to Americans, but to people around the world who live in democracies, especially. These human rights abuses of this regime should not go unnoticed. And we're having this virtual public event today. We do have some time for some questions. I think I will ask my colleague Mateo to pose a question first. I will follow up with another one. Mateo, can you, if you're there? If not, I can ask for more detail about the outside interference going on in Nicaragua that is aiding the Ortega-Murillo dictatorship. Maybe also some views, since you all have memories probably of the Somoza regime. How is this different? How is this basically worse than even than life under that difficult time when Victoria Chamorro's husband, right, was a crusading journalist against the Somozas, and so this is a long and fine tradition to expose tyranny. But if you could talk about that, and also the activities of Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, and China in aiding and abetting this regime. So I could throw the floor open to, let's start maybe with Carlos, and then Berta or Vicky could also join in.
Well, I think Ortega is widely isolated within Latin America, but he has the support of Venezuela and Cuba. He has the abstention vote from Honduras, ironically, one of our neighbors. But in the last deliberation at the Organization of American States, there were more than 26 votes against the regime. Now, these countries are united in the condemnation of violation of human rights, but there's another question dealing with whether they will declare the illegitimacy of the government or not. Venezuelan presence in Nicaragua was instrumental for Ortega to consolidate his dictatorship between 2008 and 2017, mostly because of the economic cooperation, the oil economic cooperation that represented something about $5 billion, completely outside the official budget of Nicaragua, that was used to support some government plans, but mostly to build a business empire, a business private empire by Ortega that has allowed him even to have several TV stations and a very important economic interest on oil and construction and in different economic activities. China is, I would say, out of the picture. There was a lot of speculation about the so-called project to build an interoceanic canal in Nicaragua promoted by a Chinese businessman named Juan. That failed. That was another bubble, but it wasn't never clear whether the Chinese state was really behind Juan. And the Russian presence in Nicaragua is more political than economically, and we know very little about it. It has to do more with relationship with intelligence and this kind of a more, let's say, political support. Same with Cuba. Very little, let's say, knowledge and information about that, but I think there is some exchange of information about how to organize repression. We see several processes and tendencies within the Nicaraguan repressive machinery, basically breaking protests before they take place, capturing political leaders or human rights defenders before they can do that. And also there is this nature of indiscriminate repression. There is no distinction between left and right, because between whether you are a human rights defender, a journalist, a bishop, a priest, or whatever. And that kind of, I would say, sort of network of support in terms of sharing repression tactics.
Thank you, Carlos. Berta or Vicky, do you have any comments to add? If not, we can.
I think Carlos Fernando put it very clear, and that's what's going on. And you mentioned something about the Somoza regime, and I was not born during that time yet, but from what I heard from my family, especially, who also have to go to exile during that time, they have told me, and I have heard that what is happening right now with the Ortega regimes is really worse than what they saw during the Somoza, especially regarding the way the violence have been put into citizens. You know, the Ortega regime killed more than 330 citizens during 2018. And this is something that we never had seen that brutally made in Nicaragua. So we have seen that they are very, they use violence, and they seem that they don't care about the consequences. They just do whatever it takes in order to stay in power and to impose their system to everyone in Nicaragua.
And Vicky?
I just wanted to add also to what Carlos Fernando mentioned. I think Nicaragua, it's a big jail. I mean, either you are in exile, like the three of us, or if you live in Nicaragua, there's no way that you can speak or say anything against the government. So that's why we urge the international community to step in and help us, because there's no way that with this repression, with this brutality of the regime, that Nicaraguans alone can step out and do this alone. We have tried for 3 years, and we want this to be a peaceful process, because we have been in this constant violent dictatorships with murders and wars, and that's why we and the opposition is trying for this time to do a peaceful change.
Thank you.
Jim, I want to share,
go ahead.
if you allow me, my own memory, my own experience about the Somoza dictatorship and the Ortega dictatorship. They were both brutal. They were both criminal. They were both repressive, and they were both family regimes. The Somoza regime committed genocide, bombing the cities. My own father was assassinated during the dictatorship of Somoza, and they ended up bombing La Prensa. But Somoza is not to justify him at all, but he was facing an insurrection. Ortega has been equally criminal in a peacetime, because the April rebellion is not comparable to the June-July insurrection against Somoza. This has been a peaceful process, trying to demand political reforms and free elections. So when people came out to the streets in April, May 2018, they just said Somoza and Ortega are the same thing. And it's like, it's an irony that the round of history, it's back to the same place. But the difference is people this time wants to get rid of a dictatorship in a peaceful way, through civil resistance and through elections.
Thank you. Yes, that's an important distinction. Mateo, do you have a quick question? And by the way, before I let him speak, we have had a few questions from our online viewers about whether this broadcast will be available later for viewing, and the answer is yes. This entire 45-minute presentation will be available at the heritage.org website. And it may take about 24 hours for it to get onto the streaming, but it will be available, and it can be viewed by, we hope, by many, many people around the world. Mateo, a question from you, please.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for a very detailed and excellent presentation on the tragic situation that we're seeing and the urgency that it merits in the next few months. On that note, I want to ask the three of you really, if you can chime in, but specifically for Berta and Vicky, if you had to send one message today to the international community about the conditions that your husbands are currently under and the risk that inaction might pose for your husbands on one note, but really for the country in the next few months as things are unfolding, what would that be, and what do we need to know on the outside specifically about what's going on?
Anybody?
Oh, yeah. I want to mention, and by
Thank
the
you,
way,
Mateo.
thank you, Carla.
What I would
Fernando.
like to say is that for me,
Go ahead, Vicky.
is that this is not just, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, thank you, Mateo. What I was saying is that this is not just a political issue. As a family of a political prisoner, I can say that this is a humanitarian crisis. This is a violation of human rights of the Nicaraguan people. So what I would like to say to the international community is the urgency to act and not wait until November 7th for the so-called electoral process, which we know that it's a fraud, but to act now, because our husbands, our families are in danger. They are being tortured in so many ways, and they do not have access to defend themselves. They don't have access to see their families. They are not having the proper nutrition. They are not living under the right conditions. So we are very worried for their health, for their well-being, and what will happen to them. And this is the responsibility of the Ortega-Murillo regime.
Thank you, Vicky. And Berta, you had some comments also.
Yes, I just want to recall the fact that many of those that are in prison right now have been warning the international community for many years about the possibility of the government of Daniel Ortega becoming a regime and a dictatorship. And we feel that if we would have acted many years ago, you know, if we would have acted when Daniel Ortega reformed the Constitution in order to be re-elected, it was something that was prohibited in Nicaragua. Maybe we wouldn't have faced this type of consequences. So we believe it's urgent to really stop the regime right now and act the way any country consider or any organization of human rights consider is the way they should do it. But it's urgent. We don't want more people to be killed or imprisoned or in exile, just as Carlos Fernando mentioned. Thousands of Nicaraguans live in the country because they cannot live there anymore. So in regard to our own families, I mean, they are in danger. They are in the hands of the regime. They are doing with them whatever they want. They treat them the way they want, even for the families. Families are trying to get to El Chipote, the prison where they are, and the way they're being treated is just inhuman. They're being humiliated. They don't receive any information about their families. So we know that their health is deteriorating, and we can get to the point where this can be reversed. This cannot be reversed, and there will be damage in their lives. And so that is that. I mean, our call is to really let the international community know that this is happening in Nicaragua and that we need help because we cannot do it ourselves because of the repression of the regime. So we truly hope that our voice are heard.
We've had a question from an online viewer, Dan Green, about what specific steps the international community can take. But I also want to ask about the indictments. Both of your husbands have been indicted basically for treason, it sounds like, and face up to 25-year prison terms. And I understand that you both, Vicky and Berta, have also been indicted in absentia for similar charges. If you could discuss that, plus the specific things that the international community can do. Well, we're going to start with Vicky.
Yes, as you mentioned, Jim, our husbands have been in charge of treason to the country. Berta and I have been advocating ever since they were detained, and as soon as we started our advocacy, we were charged with the same crimes. So Berta and I cannot go back to Nicaragua, which is, very sad because what we
Go ahead.
want the prisoners is just the liberation of the political. We are not political figures. We are just, doing what we need to do to let the international community know what is happening in Nicaragua. Because as I mentioned before, inside the country, there's no way that you can speak. So that's why Berta and I have decided to start this journey of liberation of Nicaragua, we call it, because it's the only way that we can let people know. As I mentioned also earlier, this judicial process is totally manipulated. So our lawyers have access to them once, and they have not have access after that. So they are completely without defense. So it's not up to us. There's no law in Nicaragua. So our lawyers are documenting everything, but we know that they won't be able to do anything because the regime is doing whatever they want, and they change the laws, they apply the laws so they can have the opposition silence, repress, detain, and because we don't have a rule of law in Nicaragua, what we are doing is speaking about all the violations of the human rights of the judicial system that is happening right now.
Thank you. And Berta, do you have anything to add?
Yes, and also I just mentioned that Carlos Fernando is also being accused by other type of, crazy thing. For us, it's just incredible. And day and night, they have created a narrative of declaring villains and traitors of the country. Anyone who dares question their policy and repression. They disappear all the opposition candidates, and then they say that it's because they are traitor of the homeland. They close all media outlets and say they are closed because they are laundering money. They close and confiscate international and national NGOs, and they say that they are criminals and tax evaders. They brutally, it's marked by an immense web of lies, repeated increasingly by the media they completely control today in the country. Their main weapon against us is their lies. So even when they say that our husbands and all the other political prisoners are being violating the laws, we know that they are not guilty, that the only thing they're trying to do is to fight for democracy and freedom and justice in our country. And I just want to make that clear, because we think those laws are illegal. The way they were created and the proposed they were created, it's just an evidence of the way that the regime is trying to stay in power.
Thank you so much. We only have a couple minutes left. Carlos Fernando, would you like that last word here as we close down?
Well, I think it's important that I think it's important to have some kind of a coordinated international action. In the case of Nicaragua, President Biden said that he was going to promote some kind of a multilateral diplomacy. The US working together with the OAS, with Latin America, with the UK, with other countries. And I think a priority should be the liberation of the political prisoners. Well, that's something around which I think the world should say a word. Even Vatican, even Pope Francis. I think we're waiting for Pope Francis to show the diplomacy of the Vatican trying to help in this crisis. But that will be only the beginning of the solution. The real solution would be what to do about the re-election of Ortega. Ortega will be accepted or recognized as a legitimate president? Will these elections will be put on controversy, on discussion about how to make a political reform to go for new elections in Nicaragua? And I think it is important to have a coordinated action with Nicaraguans. Nicaraguans don't want the world. This is not a conflict between the US and Nicaragua and the Nicaraguan government. This is a conflict between Daniel Ortega and the Nicaraguan people. Ortega is the one who's repressing the Nicaraguan people, who is attacking business people, who is attacking the church, who is attacking the press. That is the real problem. We have a dictatorship and a country that is demanding democracy. So there is a need also to restore political freedoms in Nicaragua so that the Nicaraguan people could express their voice. We're not expecting the world to solve the crisis in Nicaragua. There is a need to restore freedom, to eliminate the police state so that the Nicaraguans could express their voice and see whether they want 5 years more or dictatorship, or whether we want political change and democracy.
So thank you so much. Are there any websites that our viewers could go to find out more, or maybe to try to take some positive actions? Or if people want to get involved who are viewing this, what are some ways they can do it? Anybody? It's Carlos Fernando. Maybe at least your publication would be one way, right?
Yes, we are in confidencial.com.ni, and you can look for us also at YouTube, Confidencial Nica. we are trying to defeat censorship, basically by getting the support of our audience. And it's very important to be informed. And this is what we're trying to do every day with some of our colleagues, the Nicaraguan journalists who are also in exile in Costa Rica, in the US, in Spain, and in other countries.
Yes. Also, I will suggest there is a really amazing work that the family of the victims, those that were killed in 2018, 2019, made. It's called Museo de la Memoria Nicaragua.org, Museo de la Memoria Nicaragua.org. And you can find all the testimonies of these families and victims, so they can know more about what happened. And basically, I think most of the information is in Spanish, but there are some pieces in English and other languages that describe what is going on in Nicaragua. Hopefully, we can have more English news, but that would be a good way to go.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time now, unfortunately, but we're so glad that you took the time to join us today and to discuss the really awful situation in your country. And we just hope and pray that your message gets out and that the regime feels the pressure. And we will certainly be staying on this issue at the Heritage Foundation going forward. So thanks again, and thanks to our viewers. Sorry we may not have answered all your questions, but we hope that you have enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.